I'm Martin and I'm based in Sheffield, although this morning I'm actually sitting in a house in Suffolk. So who else have we got in the room?
Hello. My camera's come on.
Would you like to go around? We're not getting any sound from you, I'm afraid.
From me?
Sorry. Could Jane, can we hear you?
Hi, I'm Jane. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah. I'm Jane Field.
Jane.
Yeah. Shall I just carry on? Yeah. Yeah. I work for a charity in rural North Northumberland. Our base is, for anybody that knows Northumberland, our base is north of Alnwick and south of Berwick. And we have about a 200 square mile project area that's predominantly rural and coastal. And we have a small food share and food waste project.
Okay. Salva, I think we've met before, haven't we?
Yes, can you hear
Hello?
me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we have met before, Martin.
Yeah.
We've exchanged some emails, haven't
Carry on.
we? So yes, I got involved in this kind of thing with the Bury Mutual Aid Group when COVID hit, and since then I've been very interested in sort of sustainable food models for the Bury area, which is quite deprived, really. So it's something I'm very it's very important, I think.
Okay. Gareth, where are you?
Hi everyone, I'm Gareth. I work for a small worker co-op based in Lancashire in the northwest, yeah, we do all kinds of co-op stuff. Check.
Okay. Anna.
Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah. So my name's Anna and I run a charity called Food Friends in Whitstable in Kent.
Yeah.
We recruit volunteers who deliver extra portions of their home cooked foods to an isolated neighbour. So we founded in 2018, beginning of 2019, and obviously have upscaled massively in response to the pandemic, delivering kind of way over 3,000 meals now to vulnerable isolated neighbours in our area.
Okay. Chris.
Yeah, hi. Chris Cook, Linlithgow in Scotland. And I'm interested in, you could call it the legal design of business models, how we actually structure these things in a simple, lightweight way to get things financed, and to get looking at things like tenure and looking at things like mutual agreements to share risk, reward, revenues, because the current system doesn't bloody work. Thanks.
Dill Green.
Hi, I'm Dill. I'm in Brixton. I work with a group calling ourselves Mutual Credit Services. We're basically developing all sorts of models for community financial empowerment, different ways for communities and groups to come together to increase their financial resilience and use less bank money, be less reliant on bank money. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, and back to Lucy again.
Hi, sorry, you keep breaking up, so I'm finding it hard to hear you a bit, Martin. I'm Lucy. I work for an organisation called Feedback, which is
Right.
a charity which focuses on changing food systems to make things better for people and planet. And I work in an area of Merseyside called Knowsley, which is the second most deprived borough in England. And we're starting from a very low base. So we basically want to completely reinvent the food system in Knowsley and make it better for everyone. So teeny tiny ambition there.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we've got a really good mix of people who are involved in local projects, and also people who are involved in infrastructure, and particularly finance and legal infrastructure. That's very helpful for this.
Excuse me, Martin.
I think one of the most striking things
so Martin,
of the last year has
Martin,
been the enormous.
Your sound is isn't working. You can just about hear you, but not properly.
And also, you've missed me out, Martin.
It isn't working. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Carry on. Come in.
Who are you talking to me?
Sorry to miss you out. Come on in.
Right,
Yeah,
my name is Fiona. I live in Scotland. I'm really, having looked at organisational structures, be it social enterprises, employee-owned, I sort of began to realise we can't change anything until we change the fundamentals. And that would be what I think Chris was saying, and also what Dill was saying. Otherwise, we're just repeating what's always been done on top of a model that's always been used, that's fundamentally just got different wrappings on. So that's where my interest lies. How can we really do something different rather than do the icing on the cake different? Let's make a different cake outside the traditional system. We can't change the system we're in, but let's make a new cake outside our traditional system. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Can I just add, I haven't been introduced either, but is that okay?
Yeah, fire away.
Just basically saying that my name's Verian, you can call me Very, and basically I've been studying for an MA in food and development over the last year, and I'm writing my dissertation about alternative food systems, what's come out of COVID, what we can retain, issues of funding, volunteers, all of that. So this conference is really, really interesting for me. Thank you.
I'll just very quickly introduce myself as well. My name's Daniel. I'm from Bristol. I work as an advisor with anything from community businesses right up to tech startups. But my interest in the food scene is working with a lot of food businesses in the grassroots, and how to sort of address the kind of the polarity between businesses which are seen as kind of very community and just about as serving community need, which are incredibly valid, and a food scene which is quite fancy, quite aloof, and their interest in being more connected, but their challenges in bridging that gap.
Okay. Have we heard from everybody now?
No, you haven't. It's Graham from Newcastle.
Yeah, I think we. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I work in the West End of Newcastle with a number of different social enterprises, one of which is around food, but there are others. We run a large leisure centre and pool, and how to link health activities with the food projects that we run. And I'm also particularly interested in what Fiona and Chris were talking about as far as having simple structures that work well for local communities.
Okay. Is that everybody now?
I'll give a quick introduction.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Victoria Topham. I'm quite new into food systems. I've just joined as trustee of the Buckinghamshire Food Partnership, which is looking to do a sustainable food place at a county-wide level. So my day job, I work for in systems change for a think tank, and I project manage a project in Wales where we're trying to look at systems around food, health and nature for all of Wales. So I look at it from the kind of slightly more macro level and trying to figure out how you do ambitious, large scale change. Whether we do it or not, I don't know, but we're trying. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Sari in Brighton. I'm doing research to support the work of the Brighton Food Partnership and the Brighton Food Factory. I also just want to say that my 24-year-old son designed the COVID mutual aid app, and he'd be very happy to hear what it's led to in the food movement. Thank you.
Okay. Any more? Okay. So what I think we're all talking about is how we move from the current basis of the alternative food system in this country to something which looks more like a viable business model. I tend to start with the two main problems which I see with our current model. The problems of scale and also fragmentation. If I can give Sheffield, where I live, as an example of what I mean, we have in Sheffield some, as usual, amazing examples of the mutual aid systems which have grown up in the last year or so. We have more than 20 food banks. We have a number of organisations which have become very adept at distributing surplus food. But in addition to that, we have an organisation like Regather, which is basically a food production organisation. It has its own land, which it's growing fruit and vegetables on, and it also links with other small producers. And it distributes that food mainly in the form of boxes, but also in the last year in the form of ready meals. But what we have are 3 or 4 separate kinds of organisations which don't work too well together. So we have the food banks, we have the organisations which focus on surplus food distribution. We have some organisations which are about distributing food which is produced mainly locally. And so we have a series of focuses for food in the city. And some of those focuses also are very good at the social functions of bringing people together to eat, giving people an opportunity to shop together, providing kitchens for training and for social purposes. And so that's the kind of picture in Sheffield. And having done a rough review of developments around the country in the last year, I've seen that kind of picture replicated elsewhere. Now, I think the problem with this is that it doesn't really get to the heart of the issue about an alternative food system. Think about how much food is produced and sold in this country. And I'm thinking about the hundreds of billions which are spent on grocery shopping through the supermarkets. The alternative food system currently amounts to a very small proportion of that. And most of the alternative food networks and initiatives which we've seen developing in the last year or so have focused on the distribution of food, and particularly of surplus food. What we haven't seen very much of is organisations which are about aggregation, distribution and consumption. And that really is the heart of any food system. And that's really what the conventional supermarkets and food processors do. And it's how they make their money. So how can we move from our current system to an alternative? So that's the first question. Pause for a drink. 2 years ago, I went to the States to look at food hubs there. Over the last 10 or 15 years, something like 200 food hubs have been established across the States with the help of the United States Department of Agriculture. I went to food hubs in Portland, Oregon, in Philadelphia, and in Charlottesville. And the thing which I took away from my visits that was really central to the US hub experience is that they are completely focused on providing an all year round supply of good food from small and medium-sized producers to mainly big consumers. And by big consumers, I'm thinking of institutional consumers, hospitals, schools, canteens, airports in the case of Chicago. And it's that which produces scale. And it's that focus on aggregation and distribution and consumption which also gives coherence. This is not to say that the American food hubs are exclusively about the big consumers. They also provide for smaller consumers and individuals, and also for supermarkets as well. But at the heart of the business model is the focus on the big consumers. And that, of course, provides scale, and it provides profit, and it therefore provides some level of affordability, so that you can both pay a better return to the producers and you can provide good food cheaper than the niche food that we tend to see at our farmers markets in this country. So we need a systems approach which focuses on the central functions of aggregation and distribution, but also we need to bring that together with the things which we do extremely well in this country, which is, if you like, the social functions, the food surplus distribution, food as a social and a cultural experience. So kitchens, training, support for small producers to get going, and so on. These are the things we do well, and we should be building on our strengths. So that, in a nutshell, is where I'm starting from. And so what I'm looking for are ways in which we can move beyond our current system, which has got, as I say, some great strengths, towards a system which goes, if you like, upstream towards where production is made and how production is distributed. And that, Ian, is it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Martin. Well, welcome to sort of take questions in the chat, or if you want to raise hands. Can I just start with growing? So just maybe by a show of hands, is how many of us here are either growing or directly in touch with growers? Just by show of hands. So sort of a few, but not that many, and I'm pretty sure that in terms of land ownership, I suspect there's not too much. So again, is there anybody here whose project or project they're attached to actually owns the land that they grow on? So we've got Fiona down there. So Fiona, can we maybe hear from you about that?
Well, I grew up in a farming community, and I have several friends who are taking on this role of holistic farming, and I'm sure many of you here will have watched the TED Talk around that. It's one of the top 50 TED Talks. So how do we start using holistic farming to produce our produce locally, reduce our costs and increase our margins? And that's what they are doing. But they struggle because that is not the way the government are looking at things. And that is, of course, always the case. And I would also say, we band around the word systems, but how many of us have actually even read a book on systems thinking? And one of my friends who's got a small holding is an engineer, and she's very into systems thinking. And until we begin with the soil, and we have to look at this as system, not a part system, as Martin was talking about. And until we have a common understanding of what a system is, I think we struggle. But I would say my friends on Lismore who have holistic management farm, another one in the Borders, another one in Dumfries and Galloway, they're at the cutting edge of working in a different way. And many of it is going back to the type of farm I grew up in, which is mixed farming, but with the appropriate animals and crop for the area. So that's what I would like to say.
Okay, and then I guess, yeah, as has been mentioned in the chat, that the trick is the connections, isn't it? It's the connections between the growers and the distributors and the eaters, if you like. I don't like calling them consumers because it sounds like too much like capitalism to me. But Dill, do you want to just come in and just fill us in a little bit more on what you were saying in the chat?
Yeah, we've just finished with a 6-month Innovate funded project with Food Plymouth, who are the Sustainable Food Places group in Plymouth, and Open Food Network, and ourselves were working on the sort of local economy stuff. And it was an R&D project, so we weren't sort of going in there thinking we knew what to do. What we wanted to do was a very holistic sort of fact-finding mission, going right the way from consumers, buyers, and we made sure to access low-income people who aren't the normal assumed customers from sort of farmers markets and things like this, right the way through to active local economy, engaged businesses, and also people who weren't engaged in the local food economy but were local food producers of one sort or another. And there's a lot of work still to be done on that. And also, you know, hardly scratch the surface because we talk to small people. In Plymouth, there is exactly the sort of food, local food buying group, Martin, that you're talking about, called Cater Ed, which is local food and does, I think, it started doing all the school meals in Plymouth, and now it does a lot more, does other catering work. So there are sort of a large variety of existing models already in local food. And what we sort of were hoping to do was to explore some demand aggregation issues, supply aggregation around box schemes and around these bigger organizations seems to be reasonably well organized, although we produced some initiatives and we're working on pilots to help with logistics and to help with local finance cost reduction in those areas. But in terms of demand aggregation, there's a big problem with box schemes and collection from collection points, particularly for low-income people who quite often don't have cars. And so our surveys show that a lot of low-income people, their weekly shop uses a taxi. They go to the supermarket, walk there or get the bus there, and they get a taxi back with all their bags. And apart from that, they can only get to local shops. The idea of, so we had quite a lot of ideas that we couldn't test during those 6 months because it was a full-on lockdown for the whole period of time around local demand aggregation. So I'm not going to talk a lot more now because there's lots of other people here, but there's quite a lot of interesting work around that, and we're continuing a pilot with the Southwest Good Food Network down there.
Yeah, so regionalism is certainly part of it, isn't it? I mean, Martin, do you want to maybe explain a little bit about the work you did in terms of those regional, the regional and sort of federally funded approach in America, I think in Italy as well, because it does strike me that that while we can explore, like some of the things that Chris has been saying, while you can explore the mutualism and the sort of getting things together and aggregating, it does take quite a bit of time and quite a bit of work and agreement. There are models there, but it takes time. And it just seems like if we could persuade government to kind of see it from this angle, where they might really kickstart the way that they've done in America. So Martin, just wanted to explain a little bit of that, of these regional hubs.
Okay, well, let me just talk about one of them in particular, and that's a hub called The Red. It's in Portland, Oregon, on the West Coast. And it opened in 2019. I went there soon after it opened, so it was brand new. And it came about because of the problem that we've just been talking about. How do you enable small producers and medium-sized producers, how do we enable them to get access to the market year-round? And how do we link that market with consumers? How do we support small producers or people who would like to be small producers to get involved in production in the first place? How do we provide them with the technical assistance to plant at the right time, to crop at the right time, to have the right seeds and so on? And so the Red was set up to deal with that problem. It is in effect a cooperative between a large bunch of producers, federal support to some extent, but also a local trust called Eco Trust, which is concerned with sustainable agriculture in particular. And that's a model I saw and have read about across the United States. In Philadelphia, I went to visit something which was longer established. They had taken over a large warehouse in what used to be the meatpacking part of the city. And in one end came the stuff from all over the region, and out the other end went the distribution chain. But in the space of something like 10 years, the Philadelphia hub had managed to build itself up so that it was more or less self-sustaining, but was also able to expand. So they'd set up another hub in Atlanta, and they were in the process of expanding into Texas as well. So what I was interested in was seeing viability, was seeing examples of schemes which were able to pay a better return to the producers. And the evidence I collected in the States shows very clearly that the returns are much better from these cooperative hubs than they are from the conventional supermarkets or food processors. But as always, what I was seeing was a system which was focused on if you like, the institutional consumer, as well as, but particularly the institutional consumer and the individual consumer.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions there. Procurement clearly is a tool, but it's something that's very not easy for both the small producers and sort of small community groups to be part of. Hopefully councils will start to listen more and look at things like the Preston model and see how effective it can be, and even politically it can be quite effective. They seem reasonably popular in Preston. So it will go to Chris first, who raised his hand, and then Ella. Chris?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I mean, I've been banging some ideas in the chat, because it's all based on the realization that actually the problem is the very nature of the corporate itself, a legal person. And I mean, including the state as a corporate. It's a structural problem, and I won't go into the legal theory, but what I've been working with for a long time now is the idea of institutions as agreements. Simple agreements to share risk, to share cost, to share surplus, so that people can be members of them. I was a member of a housing co-op for 10 years. Didn't have a lease, didn't have a tenancy, didn't have a freehold. I was a member. And that principle of participation in simple, lightweight agreements is, in my view, something which can spread actually virally with the right instruments. So I'm working with Dill on mutual credit, the right instrument. is essentially a credit, a voucher that's returnable in payment for something money's worth rather than money. But I won't go down that road any more than that. Just to say that, just going back to what Martin said, the beauty about cooperation and creating cooperatives of cooperatives, as I see it, is it's the cooperative advantage. You're not paying a return to rent seekers, people who seek something for nothing. So we can, with a cooperative model, outcompete any rent-seeking model with, you know, the sharing economy problem is that shareholders don't share, landlords don't share, lenders don't share. But with the right agreements and the right instruments, which I think is quite possible to do, then we can actually outcompete them. And that means we can offer a better bargain to the landowners and to everybody else, you know?
We can outcompete providing we have the scale. And that means bringing in a large number of producers.
Yeah.
It means having a sophisticated IT system, which is able to deal with payments and invoices, deliveries, and all the other things.
That's what we're working on, Martin, at Mutual Credit. It's all about shared data, shared ledgers, and not necessarily a blockchain, but I won't go down that rabbit hole. Okay. But this is you're precisely right. Shared information, shared data, communications is the enabler for what we're doing.
And I think what's interesting is that, as you've said in the chat, Chris, is that some growers are used to sharing. So farmers are used to sharing. They don't all want to own their own tractors, their own equipment, etc. So hopefully some would embrace the idea that they might share in other ways as well. Ella, we'll come to you now.
Thank you. I've had some thoughts swirling around my head, so I hope I expressed them clearly. I read your paper, Martin, that was attached to the invitation for the event about your experiences in Italy and the US and your thoughts of the effect, or the kind of impact of that on recommendations for the UK. And there was just one thing that struck me about a line that just mentioned that in Italy there was fewer women in full-time employment, which meant that there was more time for those women maybe to kind of shop daily or more regularly. And that kind of got me on a track to thinking about some of the things we've talked about today, and that comment in the chat a bit earlier about, you know, 95% of UK food is bought in supermarkets. And, you know, I guess I don't speak for all women, but I like work. You know, I don't necessarily want to have to play off one against the other. I'm not saying that's what you're saying that anyone should do, but it just struck me. And also, I guess, with supermarkets, you know, I wasn't around when they were a new thing, but I can see how, you know, we know that women tend to control household budgets, and if you're doing your shopping and you have to make it fit after bedtime or after work or with the kids, I can just see how that's so much easier than sort of going around all the individual shops. And I just wondered what your thoughts were, you know, if we need to get to scale on this model, which is obviously a lot better for everyone, as evidenced, it needs a really substantial rise in demand. And so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can replicate the real convenience that you get from, you know, a 24-hour supermarket with maybe facilities for children, etc., in this kind of holistic, locally produced model.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just begin by saying you put your finger on a dilemma here. Are we about replacing, supplanting supermarkets, or are we about reforming them, giving them nudges to change the way they behave? Or are we pursuing a two-pronged strategy? I'll leave that on one side for the moment. I think one of the mistakes we make in thinking about an alternative food system is that we assume that everybody who is going to shop or produce are activists like us, who want to spend lots and lots of time thinking and working on food. But as you say, the vast majority of people want convenience. And although supermarkets have got a dire business model, dire in the sense of what it does to the planet, and the small returns it gives to producers and also the people who work for it. The thing it really excels at, and we've seen this over the last year with Tesco employing 50,000 extra delivery workers, is consumer satisfaction. And that is a really hard thing to compete with. So when people say, well, let's move away from volunteers to maybe some kind of credit system so that people who can't afford conventional shopping can work in a social supermarket and use their credit to defray the cost of their purchases. I think, well, that's fine, providing you're a single person without any children. But if you're a single mother with children, finding the time to work in the supermarket for the sake of affordability is not going to work. So when we talk about a systems approach, I think we have to think about it from the point of view of all the stakeholders, including the consumers. And I don't think there is a simple solution to this problem.
Follow up on that. I think there's something about the kind of brand recognition, isn't there? I can't remember where I saw this, but I feel like there's some study that said that maybe Tesco, or one of them, was maybe one of the second or third most trusted brands in the UK, and it's just so ubiquitous. So I think you're dead right in that people like it, you know. You kind of have to make people want another thing, which it's going to be more of a long transition rather than a hammer over the head. But that's enough from me. Thank you.
Lucy, do you want to come in? Just, I'm really interested in the point about the mobile veg and the solutions that if you like, at the eating end of the scale, community hubs are coming up with solutions, and mobile does seem to be one of them. I know in Brighton, we've got several people are facing this, several hubs are facing this dilemma of they don't need a 7-day-a-week place, but they need 7 days a week to put their stuff, including sort of ambient goods, etc. But is one of the solutions to that actually you have a hub shared by several food hubs? That's the storage and the distribution looked after, and then a mobile van comes down to them and either sits outside a hub, a well-known hub, or moves around a neighborhood if it's a wider spread neighborhood. But could you tell us a little bit about what you were saying in the chat? You're on mute, Lucy.
Stupid thing. It puts me on mute when I don't ask it to. Sorry about that. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, here in Knowsley, it's a bit of a weird borough in that it's very long and thin and runs from one end to the other of where Liverpool sits. And it's a mix of rural and also urban, but it's also very, very distinct in terms of all of the wards, of which there are 12, have their own character, have their own kind of way of doing things. And there's not a lot of crossover between the areas in terms of people going into different sections. So if you're sort of living in Kirby in the north of the borough, you are not going to go to Prescott for your shopping where the supermarket might be, because it's a kind of alien concept, and it's also stepping outside the boundaries of where you live, which sounds a bit odd, but it's all kind of historical and everything else that goes with it. And the kind of landscape that we've got for food at the moment in Knowsley is we have one Tesco, we have, I think it's an Aldi, and we've also now got a Lidl, and they're all concentrated in the south of the borough, and the rest of the borough has got some of those frozen food type places. It's got the odd Nissa, etc. And when things like the food vouchers, the school food vouchers, are issued, they're not actually usable in farm food shops or Nissas or whatever, so they become frankly useless. And in the areas where we're currently working, we're working in Kirby, and that's where we've started taking a veg van on a Thursday. In fact, it's out there now today, and it goes to 3 different areas within Kirby, and we've linked up with the local community groups who are in those spaces, and we've said to them, what's the best time, what's the best day, how can we do this, da 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 da. And we've also linked in with things like the local medical centre, and they send out texts to their patients to remind them that the fruit and veg van is coming round and will be outside the medical centre at X time on a Thursday, and we found that we're getting a lot of interest. I'm also being asked to put that into other spaces as well, and a lot of this has got to do with the fact that the traditional kind of spaces within the hubs of the wards have all become, you know, kind of like, what do you call it, vaping shops, all the rest of it, which is the issue that comes up around business rates being the same whether or not you're selling an orange or you're selling vaping, so which is going to make the most profit, so, you know, and also the problems around the fact that we've also got a big situation in Merseyside where a lot of leaseholds were bought, a lot of shops were bought as a kind of tax write-off, so they're boarded up and they're not used, and they are in what you might describe as less desirable areas, but the rental on those spaces, you're looking at 20 to 30,000 pounds a year, which is just ludicrous, and nobody is going to be able to take that on. So part of what we look at is how we can try and influence some of the policy changes that might happen locally, but in the meantime, if we can provide access to fruit and veg, then we're able to demonstrate that there is actually a requirement, a need, and people would like it. But if it's not there, there's no point public health and other people with all their messages about, oh, you must eat this and you shouldn't do that and blah, 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 because choice isn't there. And if we're not providing the opportunities to people, they're not going to make the right choices because they just don't have that option. So that's what we're trying to look at and see where else we can do that. And the mobile van has the advantage of the fact that it hasn't got the overheads of a shop. I like your idea about maybe a food hub, which the van could kind of like connect to. That I think sounds really good. But it also gets around the fact that if we set up a fruit and veg shop in, for example, Stockbridge Village, we know that nobody else from the rest of Knowsley would go to Stockbridge Village to visit that fruit and veg stall, and we can't put them in every space. So the mobile van just gets around that a little bit.
Okay, that's great.
Could I just say something about that? I mean, the underlying problem we're talking about here is the lack of investment.
I think Martin has just pressed, having been given the choice, I've done this before myself, he's pressed the leave the room button rather than the close the pop-up button. So I'll just, hopefully Martin will pop back in, but I think it's an interesting choice. We're moving out soon. To me, clearly, collaboration and sharing is what we do best. And we have to encourage, don't we, like institutions like councils, universities, funders, to be getting behind the idea of sharing. So each individual community organisation can't possibly resolve all of the issues all themselves. So from what I've noticed, particularly from COVID, but beforehand anyway, is this need to think about collaboration, to even things like this breakout room where you're sharing for free. No one's looking to get paid. No one's hiding and being guarding their secrets. Everybody wants everybody to know. So that seems to be a key way forward. And to let councils know that that's what they need to be getting behind. Use their assets. If they've got shops, make these shops available to people who will make it work. Fiona, did you want to come in?
Yes, I'm just wondering if anybody has mapped the system, because systems are not about parts. And we've been talking a lot about parts, but systems are about flows. One of the things I used to manage was a systems thinking group started about 2010 by engineers, and looking at people like Donella Summersworth and many others. And I think we're trying to get the parts to work within the system rather